Fasten your safety belts, ladies and gentlemen, because John Bauer has been around long enough to know what he's talking about, has some very strong opinions, and I have encouraged him not to hold back. Dr. John Bauer.
Thanks, Mark. I don't know, my wife thinks I'm boring, actually. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share with you a few thoughts I have. The title of my talk is Lutheran Social Ministry, and well, I guess this is where the opinion piece comes in. I would like to try to argue today for you that social ministry, mercy ministry, is today's best hope for resuscitating, yes, resuscitating Lutheran churches in America. First, I want to establish a few bona fides. You know, what qualifies me to be here to talk to you today? Well, I'm a preacher's kid, graduated undergrad and master's from two nice Lutheran universities. I was a Lutheran educator, as Mark mentioned, a college dean, an institute director, social ministry board chair. Did a variety of things. Now I'm president and CEO of a Lutheran social ministry organization. I'm the incoming chair of Lutheran Service. You see the kind of theme running through all of this. Yeah, it is pretty apparent. 63 years, born, raised. I get this Lutheran thing pretty well. It's a significant part of my life. But I do have to share with you a few other bona fides. I am a member of Pastor Jeske's congregation, St. Marcus, and I'm privileged to serve on the board of directors of Time of Grace Ministry. Very exciting. But what really qualifies me to be here to talk to you today, here in this place, is the fact, yes, I am the proud owner of a 2003 Heritage Softail Classic, and it's great to be here at Harley-Davidson. So why use a word that is pretty powerful, like resuscitation? I suppose I could have used the word renewal or rejuvenation or reclamation or something like that. Well, let me ask you, how many of you know of congregations that are in a condition similar to the poor sap that's laying on the ground there? Dead, dying, no heartbeat, no breathing, no circulation, body temperature dropping rapidly, little churches, few frozen chosen still sitting in the pew on Sunday morning, but the reality is, the way they're going, you and I know that eventually it's terminal. And when the last little old lady, blue hair, passes away and the pastor conducts the funeral, to the few friends that might be there, shuts the door, that's the end of that congregation. It's just an all too common story. So what I want to talk to you about today is the role that social ministry or mercy ministry plays in the church, has played over a long period of time, and would like to argue for you that there are opportunities for congregations to get new life, to breathe some excitement and enthusiasm into the life of the church through mercy ministry. Well, we have a long history of mercy ministry, and I mean, Lutherans know how to do this stuff. When the immigrants came over, established young congregations throughout this country, if there were needs in the community, Lutherans knew how to provide those, and usually through volunteer organizations. But over time, as things often happen, those became institutionalized. And services were entrusted to organizations that specialized in those kinds of things. This is true not just of churches, but of local communities as well. A very common story is how in the 30s and 40s and 50s, what were once county poor farms or county orphanages or local community chests pretty soon began to abrogate those responsibilities to state and federal entities, to larger provider organizations. And funding shifted as well. Services to people in human need shifted from individual and congregation support to funding by the government. And Bethesda is no exception to that. While we still rely on the generosity of many individual donors, the fact of the matter is about 80% of our budget comes from Medicaid reimbursement. And so services in all of these various areas of human need have become very professionalized, very specialized, requiring people with advanced degrees. I should also say very regulated, and a lot of oversight and accountability is provided that demands that kind of professionalization. Well, what is the net result of all of that? In many ways, social ministry, mercy ministry, has become disconnected from the sponsoring churches. Now, I want to talk just a minute or two about an organization I'm involved with because I think it, in many ways, reflects the current condition we find ourselves in. Lutheran Services in America is a great organization. I happen to be on the board of directors, as is Fred Craigle back there. We had our annual conference last week in Washington, D.C., and it's a 15-year-old alliance that is formed by the recognized service organizations of the LCMS and the affiliated social ministry organizations of the ELCA. It's 307 members or so. We have representatives in all 50 states. It's a pretty powerful group of people when you think about the impact that we have. 1 in 50 Americans receive services from LSA. Number 25 on the Philanthropy 400 list, so a lot of charitable dollars come in. 18+ billion in combined revenue among those 300 organizations. We employ 250,000 people and cover the whole breadth of human service: health, aging, youth, adoption, disabilities, counseling. I should also add immigration and refugee services and a whole host of other types of ministry. But we struggle. I mean, we're an organization that tries to provide value to our member organizations, and the reality is that revenues are diminishing from the sponsoring church bodies because of declining memberships. LCMS lost 45,000 members last year. ELCA, for a variety of reasons, more than that. So there are diminishing resources that are coming to us. At the same time, we have found some very interesting ways to put aside our theological differences and some of the differences we have on social issues and find common ground to support strong social ministry throughout the country. And while LSA brings a lot of value to its members, what we are finding and what we've been talking increasingly about is the relationship between LSA and all of these social ministry organizations and the two adjudicatories, the two sponsoring denominations. And I am here to tell you that while support is diminishing, the member organizations of LSA are looking for ways to reconnect with the churches that they support, looking for ways to get re-engaged at the local level and the congregational level. And so many of the LSA organizations are developing plans to find connectedness to their Lutheran church constituents again. And here's where I think there's a really meeting of need. And as an example of this, at our conference last week, an entire morning workshop was devoted to the subject of volunteerism. Because our member organizations realize that, especially in times of rising costs and diminishing financial resources, a lot of our strength comes from the volunteers that we engage. And as I'm going to argue, ways of engaging members in your congregations in mercy ministry, connecting to social ministry, is a way to put faith into action. Well, let me talk a few minutes about my organization. Bethesda is 110 years old, founded in Watertown, Wisconsin. The Lutheran Children's Friends Society encouraged the formation of this organization. There were families in the local Watertown area that had children with special needs, epilepsy, developmental disability, and so the Evangelical Lutheran Society for the Care and Training of the Epileptic and Feeble-Minded was started. In German, of course. And remember, this was 1903, and I won't begin to try to pronounce that. 1904, we admitted our first 5 children into a residential setting. 1908, many of you have been out to Watertown. You know the large campus on the south side of town started there with a donation of property. In its heyday, we had almost 700 people living on that campus in an institutional setting, from young children all the way to very elderly adults. And I will tell you, and I know that there are people in this room who would go out to Watertown to volunteer time. Maybe you went out with your parents back in the 60s or 70s and played softball with the residents on a Sunday afternoon, or went to a picnic, or, you know, our history is filled with examples of that type of volunteer engagement. But, and I think our organization is very typical of many large social ministry organizations, things changed. Once we became Medicaid eligible in the 1970s, we also were part of a movement beginning in the 80s to downsize large institutional settings and transition people into community integrated living arrangements. Quality of life was improved, people were able to access resources in the community, and the institutional setting really declined. To illustrate this, in the 10-year period of time when I was on the board of directors at Bethesda, we went from 27 to 127 group homes in 10 states. Just exploded in our community-based services while we continued to downsize the campus. We've also begun international efforts, and I'll talk a little bit more about one example of that in a minute. Then in 2006, we merged with another large Lutheran service provider on the West Coast, Good Shepherd Communities, that essentially doubled the size of our organization. In 2010, we formally launched the Bethesda Institute, which is our main outreach function, publication of materials, providing thought leadership, curriculum materials, and so forth. So today, Bethesda supports about 1,800 people. We have about 3,100 employees, 290 program locations, 14 states, and 8 foreign countries. So we are a very large national service provider, just exactly what I was talking about before. The history is to become highly professionalized, highly specialized, and in many ways disconnected. But I do want to share the distinctives that we have tried to carve out for ourselves that I think make a little difference, make a big difference, and perhaps can give you some thoughts around how you can connect to the needs of your community through Mercy Ministry. Our mission is to enhance the lives of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities through services that share the good news of Jesus Christ. Enhance lives through services. Services are not the end. They're just the means to connect people to their Lord and Savior. So one of the huge distinctives for Bethesda is that we are committed to supporting the people we serve in their spiritual lives. Now, back in the day, when we served 700 people on campus, we had a very large chaplaincy staff. And we had resident pastors and chaplaincy assistants, and they ministered to the people on campus. You don't do that in the community. When you've got 290 program locations, how would you like that as your job description if you were a chaplain running from house to house to house to house? I mean, it gets to be very problematic. So for us, we need to connect to congregations to help us meet the spiritual needs of the people we support. To accomplish that, we have 23 deployed ministry consultants around the country. And these are individuals who basically have two jobs. First of all, we want to make sure that every person that we support is able to express their religious life in ways of their choosing. So if we support someone and he and she and the family come from a Methodist tradition, it's our obligation to make sure that they are connected to the Methodist congregation of their choice. If people don't have a church home, certainly we want to connect them to a local Lutheran church partner. So first and foremost, we want to make sure the people we support are being served and integrated into the life of a local congregation. And a part of the job that these ministry consultants have is then to work with those congregations to be welcoming and inclusive communities that can bring people with developmental disabilities into their fellowship and help provide them a rich spiritual life in the congregational context. But the second part of the job, which we think is really where things are moving for us, is to provide consulting services to congregations in areas where we may not serve anybody, but in congregations which want to develop their own disability outreach ministry. The fact of the matter is, in the United States, of people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, under 25% have their needs met by a provider organization such as Bethesda. 75% of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities live at home and oftentimes are being cared for by aging parents. Or if they're younger, they may have their needs met in many ways by public schools and other service organizations, up to the time of aging out or graduating from high school. But families are the ones who provide the direct care for the majority of people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. Well, I got to tell you, that adds stress to family life. There are tremendous stresses that are put on parents of children who have exceptional needs. And so how do you provide those kinds of supports? What more natural way is there to try to connect to those families than from your congregation with the assistance of a social ministry organization like Bethesda? And to support these efforts, then, through our institute, we publish religious life curriculum materials and provide other resources that help congregations to develop their own disability ministry. In fact, we are just winding up a 3-year curriculum development project that will end up producing what we know to be the largest Bible study curriculum for adults with disabilities ever produced in this country. And then we also do international work with partners, and I greatly appreciated Dick's presentation, and maybe Mark will invite me back another time to talk about international outreach. But we have a goal as an organization to create a global network of partnerships with other Lutheran organizations around the world to help meet the needs of people in those countries as well who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then the last distinctive is by October of this year, we will be the first and only large multi-state national organization to achieve accreditation with our accreditation agency, the Council on Quality and Leadership. So that's a little commercial about Bethesda, but I share that with you as an illustration of how an organization like ours has in many ways gone full circle from early years, which depended on very strong congregational involvement and volunteer engagement, to circle around to becoming a very professional, highly specialized provider organization, and coming full circle to the realization that we cannot begin to carry out our mission without strong connections to local congregations and the members of those congregations. So what does this future suggest to us? And this, of course, is what I'm going to argue with you today, that Lutheran churches need social ministry organizations to fulfill their missions and serve their communities. It's not an option. And why Lutheran services? This is in our DNA. I mean, we get this stuff, right? Or we should. We're saved by grace through faith. We know that. To love and serve our neighbor. And so what I want to suggest to you today is that there has been, over a long period of time, kind of a disconnect in many ways that I think is unfortunate, because I truly believe that the call to faith and the call to serve are not separate things. They're not sequential. You don't have to, take 3 years of Bible study before you can start serving your fellow human being in need. They are coincident and they are interdependent. And I want to argue also that disconnection from social ministry deprives Christian congregations of the opportunity for member engagement in mercy to others. And that's partly our fault. I mean, we got very good at doing what we do. And whether it's disability services or adoption or care for the elderly or youth and family or immigration, whatever it is, digging water wells, whatever it is, we entrusted that to others and in many ways deprived ourselves of the opportunities to become directly engaged in mercy. For a lot of us, think of my old Rotary Club in Wauwatosa, an aging club, good bunch of old guys, very involved in their community 50 years ago. Today, yeah, let's support the Hart Park Rotary Band Shell. Get out the checkbook. You know, and I think a lot of congregations are the same way. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, money is the tool of movement, as a good friend of mine used to say, but it is not direct engagement in mercy. And sadly, I think because of that, churches are perceived in their communities as not being relevant or not having value to their communities. And I think there are also some wrong-headed thinking that we've engaged in over the years. Social gospel, you know, something that I remember as a kid. Oh, we don't do food pantry, that's social gospel, you know. And it's all about word and sacrament. Don't get me wrong, the means of grace are the means of grace. But we've allowed ourselves, I think, to think incorrectly. Rice gospel. Well, you know, we'll give you the rice if you come to church first. Or fellowship. I remember I was on the board of directors of Bethesda for a short period of time, and I had a young pastor write to me and tell me, yeah, I had to chastise a couple of my elderly members because I found out that they were volunteering at the Bethesda thrift store. And, you know, we're a Wisconsin Synod church, and that's a Missouri Synod organization, and, you know, that's a violation of church fellowship. I said to the guy, you gotta be. So let me get this straight. Sorting used clothing is an expression of church fellow. I don't think so. So we've allowed ourselves to be misled in a lot of ways. On the other hand, mercy ministry and social ministry are opportunities to show the hands of Christ in a world of human need, in a world of hurt. And it provides opportunities for volunteerism. And if you're looking for ways to engage new members, particularly those millennials don't serve on boards, I'm sorry. Millennials love to get their hands dirty. And you've got to find ways for them to show up on a Saturday morning and do something. And I think there are many opportunities through social gospel. Social ministry. You know, and I love this text from Matthew. It's the story of the sheep and the goats. You know, Jesus said, you know, to those who are goats, you know, you're getting tossed out because when I was in prison, you did not clothe me. You know, you didn't visit me. When I was naked, you didn't clothe me. When I was hungry, you did not feed me. And, you know, they asked about that, and he said, whatever you did for the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. And I also found it interesting that he didn't say, you know, when I was naked, you gave me a church bulletin, or when I was hungry, you know, you said the Our Father over me. You know, no. And it's also interesting, I think, that with a few exceptions, Jesus just healed people. And then announced forgiveness later. You know, they didn't make people pass a litmus test before he showed mercy, did he? In this beautiful passage from Ephesians 2, we know the first part of it. You know, it's by grace you've been saved through faith, and not of yourselves. It's a gift of God, not of works, so that no man can boast. And then we sort of forget the rest of this. For we are God's workmanship, poema, his beautiful artworks, poems, created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God prepared in advance for do. And if that isn't enough to get the juices going, to get out into communities and begin to show mercy to others, I don't know what is. I love this logo. It's the LCMS thing around the threefold emphasis of the church, but I think it's very instructive. I first encountered this kind of tripartite arrangement. Mark Driscoll, the founder of Mars Hill Church out in Seattle, used to talk about this. And all three of these elements are critical to the life of the church. Witness, martyria, the preaching, the proclamation aspect of the church. Life together, in communion, in community, and mercy, diakonia, showing the hands of Christ to the world. But here's the danger, and why I think a lot of churches have kind of shot themselves in the foot. If you focus only on the witness aspect of the church, word and sacrament ministry, nothing else, I would suggest to you that there is a danger of your church falling into the trap of dead orthodoxy. I mean, there are many churches who suffer from dead orthodoxy. It's a kind of hubris, I would argue, a doctrinal arrogance. We have the word in its truth and purity, and that justifies not doing anything else. On the other hand, life together, there are churches where that's all there is. We're going to find as many ways to be inclusive, and it's all about the church and its identity with the church, and to the compromise of Scripture and the ignoring of human need. And I would say that's where a lot of dying, dead, mainline Protestants are today. We could call that, kind of the ecclesiastical hubris. And there are churches that, to the exclusion of preaching and community and communion, focus on just doing good works, feeding the poor, and that is social gospel, isn't it? And there's a kind of an ethical hubris associated with that as well. All right, I got a few minutes left, right, Mark? 3, 2. All right, here we go. A quick case study. We've been involved in the Dominican Republic in a church planting project. Bethesda was first invited there in 2001 because we learned about a little orphanage that this lady ran for children with disabilities. Eventually, LCMS World Missions and World Relief and Human Care and Bethesda formed a partnership, created a managing team, funded it, called a couple of missionaries. South Wisconsin District joined us. There's a great little YouTube video which I would encourage you to watch, which really does a great job of this. You can find it at Dominican Republic Lutheran Mission Documentary. Quick, write that down because here comes the next slide. And the whole premise of this church planting project was to reach out to the communities in the Dominican Republic and identify families who had children with developmental disabilities as a way to meet human need and draw people into the church. And it has been unbelievable how this has been blessed over 8 years. Number 23 there, Edward, is actually the chairman of the congregation in Palmar Arriba. Every week, volunteers from that congregation go to a government-run orphanage for children with developmental disabilities. Just hold them, love them, play with them. They get no other exposure to human love and care. Another strategy is called Amigos de Jesus, Friends of Jesus. And you canvass communities and find families who have children with disabilities and invite them to typically a Saturday afternoon day camp where volunteers teach Bible stories, sing, act out. Jackie and I were at one. 8 people came, 50 volunteers from that congregation. We do community rehabilitation. Here's Dr. Marisol Martinez, our developmental disabilities director, doing in-home supports. So members of your congregation could be visiting homes, helping families who have children with developmental disabilities. And out of this has grown worshiping communities, a congregation in Palmar Arriba that now has about 100 baptized and confirmed members. A new church in Las Americas outside the capital, dedicated a seminary just this last March. We were able to take over a school, and Concordia Lutheran School now has about 125 children, grades K through 7. And Bethesda, working with people in the area and the missionaries, after their patient work with the government-run institution, was able to extract 6 children, orphans, with developmental disabilities, and serve them in a group home setting, a model now that the government is looking at to replicate in other parts of the country. And Bethesda trained the staff, who also happened to come from the congregation in Palmar, Ariba. I won't go into the diagram, but here's what I want to leave you with. I want to argue that direct engagement in mercy ministry by members of your congregations empowers them to put faith into action. To not be engaged in social outreach is to deny members the opportunity. It puts the face of Christ's love out there for the community. And then there are a lot of us who get this stuff professionally, and we have the professional expertise to help congregations do this. And so we want to try to form a partnership in order to help you do what you want to do with your community. And so partnerships with social ministry organizations, I think, provide wonderful volunteer engagement opportunities. And finally, help congregations get the focus out toward their communities and not inwardly focused, which finally is the death of just about anything. So, call to faith, call to serve. Thank you very much.